Good morning and welcome to BeeferLink TV, your daily dose of industry information. Today I'm joined by Pawel, who is our Frontier Policy Manager here at Beefer, and we're going to be talking about excise duty. Now, this is a technical matter, which again is related to representation and an agent's liability. Pawel, would you like to expand on that, please?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Natalie. Yes, representation and liability, again, you could probably say, but that's probably the most important and most commonly discussed topic here in the Secretariat, and that's what most of the inquiries we receive actually concern. Why is that? It's hugely important. There's money involved, so obviously if you get this wrong, it may cost you dearly, and unfortunately we've seen many cases, so that's why we talk about representation actually on a regular basis. And excise is a little different. It's quite specific in the sense that it's not exactly the same as import duty. Import duty is covered in the Taxation Cross-Border Trade Act 2018, and then when you read this, it specifically refers to import duty. Then we have import VAT, which is covered in the VAT Act 1994, Section 16. It tells you that import VAT should be treated as if it were the duty of customs. So the two are sort of on the same level in a way from the operational perspective. But excise is different, and it's covered by different legislation, and there's a lot of that legislation as well when it comes to excise duty. So that's why we need to talk about that.
Sure. So how is excise duty different when it comes to the agent's liability?
So as I mentioned before, your typical customs representation, direct or indirect, would protect you from liability in case of direct representation, would make you jointly and severally liable when it comes to indirect representation. Obviously, you're always liable when you make mistakes, errors, omissions. That's not covered by representation. You are responsible for your own action.
Sure.
But excise duty is different. And I'll read a piece of very specific legislation which covers that. And it's the Excise Goods Holding, Movement and Duty Point Regulations 2010. And I'll read the section. We'll add a link to this particular act to the description of the video, so everyone will be able to go back to that. But just for everyone, it goes as follows. So the person liable to pay the duty when excise goods are released for consumption by virtue of Regulation 6 is the person who declares the excise goods or on whose behalf they are declared upon importation. So we already have two people potentially. Who declares the excise goods or on whose behalf they are declared. And then it goes, in the case of an irregular importation, any person involved in the importation is liable to pay the duty. Where more than one person is involved in the irregular importation, each person is jointly and severally liable to pay the duty. So as you can see,
Very clear.
It's very clear. At the same time, what's irregular importation? We don't really know. So it could be interpreted very broadly, but it tells you very, very sort of specifically that a customs agent, but also a freight forwarder's haulier's responsibility and liability for excise duty may be much higher than it is with your typical standard import duty and import VAT. And unfortunately, again, we've seen a lot of cases in the Secretariat where freight forwarders, customs agents were involved in an irregular importation or movement of goods, and they were made jointly and severally liable.
Right, I see.
So that's why it's so important to be aware of that liability, to be aware of this extra layer of responsibility as well. That's why we are talking about
Of course, yeah,
today.
and it's very important to read out that legislation.
It is. It's quite complex actually, because there's one act, but there's other acts that cover excise duty. And excise duty, we all know, it's very specific. There's a lot of fraud around excise duty, be it cigarettes or alcohol, people trying not to pay excise duty, which can be quite high.
Sure. So in terms of next steps, what should Beefer members do to mitigate any risks relating to moving excise goods?
I don't think I will say anything new here, really. Know your customer, due diligence, probably even more due diligence when it comes to excise movements or excise goods movements. But I would probably say that making sure that you have provisions in your standard operating procedures which cover movement of excise goods, because of that additional liability.
Sure.
So if you are moving excise goods, if you, for whatever reason, haven't got anything in your SOPs, please make sure you do have that please make sure you cover excise goods in your SOPs if you move them. And obviously, we as BIFA, we've published guidance. That guidance can be accessed online. We'll again post a link under the in the description of this video. The guidance is very brief, but again, it sort of highlights the importance of due diligence and highlights the risks associated with excise duty movements. And again, we are not solicitors, so if you have any specific inquiries, you may want to consult a solicitor about what to do, how to deal with potential claims. But I think that's just an awareness raiser,
of course,
this video.
Yeah.
But like I'm saying, if you move excise goods, please make sure you have provisions for that. Please make sure you understand potential liability for that.
That's great advice. Thank you very much, Pawel.
Thank you.
As Pawel mentioned, there are some resources available to you as BIFA members, so we'll pop them in the description of this video. That's all for today's episode of BIFA Link TV, your daily dose of industry information.